Hello and welcome back to Lap of the World. I'm Richard, and when we last left off about a month ago, we had just added Atlanta Motorsports Park as a pin to our board after a fun day out with performance driving experience. Today, we're getting back in the saddle answering a subscriber's question and providing several excuses for not posting videos these last few weeks, so stick around. Before we get started, I will apologize for the hiatus. I had to prioritize a little over the last few weeks to take care of an overdue domestic project. This was my son's bathroom before, during, and after a remodel in which my wife's son and I did everything but the plumbing. So you can file teaching myself how to tile under the category of how I afford my hobby. Moving on, the question came up in the comments last week where Josh from the NSX experiment writes, I wouldn't mind hearing more about some of the upgrades you've done to prepare the NSX for more time on the track. Now, I'm actively working on a video to more properly introduce my particular NSX, but in the meantime, I don't think it'll hurt to cover that small base. Now, for this video, I'm going to focus on things that I've done exclusively for track use. So I'm not going to talk about any of the modifications or restorations I've done to the car that may have also had some benefit to the track. I'm going to focus on things that I've done specifically for track use. And these may apply to any first generation NSX or indeed any car in general in some cases. Now, the first generation NSX is a pretty capable car out of the box. So small spoiler, this may be a short list, but we'll get started anyway. In order of descending importance, you'll note there are no big colorful calipers or cross-drilled rotors poking out from behind the spokes here. The original NSX brake hardware has, in my experience, been consistently up to the task of stopping this car on every track so far, including a few that are somewhat notorious for being tough on brakes. Of course, if I were running some flavor of forced induction, I might have legitimate need of a big brake kit. But for my stock power and lighter than stock weight NSX, the original calipers and rotors get the job done. What I have changed in the braking system are the consumables, namely the fluid and the pads. Now, in my opinion, good brake fluid is maybe one of the most important upgrades you can make to your braking system. I would venture to guess that the vast majority of all brake failures on track are due to boiling brake fluid. Goodness knows I have personally explored much more of VIR's grounds in my MR2 than I would have liked on account of boiling cheap fluid. I won't get too deep into the science of brake fluid in this episode, but suffice to say that the best brake fluids are notable for having significantly higher boiling points than your typical off-the-shelf fluid. And yes, that was boiling points plural. Brake fluids should all list 2 boiling points. A dry boiling point, which basically describes your best case scenario with new fluid, and a wet boiling point, which basically describes your worst case boiling point once the fluid's been completely saturated. It's called a wet boiling point because most brake fluids are hydrophilic, so they absorb water over their lifetime, which reduces their effective boiling point. For comparison, we'll take the RBF 600 by Motul that I currently run in my car with a dry boiling point, let's see here, a typical dry boiling point of 594 F and a typical wet boiling point of 399 F. That's pretty good. Now we'll compare that to a yellow bottle brand X here, if you want to call it that. The minimum wet boiling point on this is just 284 degrees F. So that's more than a 100-degree difference in the capabilities of these two fluid. That could easily be the difference between having an entirely fun weekend with no worries about your brakes and having some poop come out in turn 10 at Road Atlanta. Now, with respect to pads, I have settled on Hawk's HP Plus compound for my car. And I'll be honest here, I have not experimented very broadly with brake pads. I went from some pads of unknown origin that came on the car to the Hawk items, and I haven't looked back or elsewhere. That's for a couple of reasons. First, because Hawk offered contingency sponsorship for NASA time trial competitors, which means if I won events, I got coupons that I could then redeem for brake pads or other related paraphernalia. So over the course of a couple of seasons, I actually ended up winning effectively a couple of sets of pads. Having said that, I've stuck with them outside of contingency sponsorship because they just work. This set and the one preceding it I bought with my own dollars and no coupons. Hawk Brakes is not paying me to say this, and they have never gifted me any pads directly. If Hawk Brakes would like to do so, information on where to send free brake pads will be on the screen now. Now, to elaborate on they just work, by that I mean they'll engage the anti-lock braking system on the car if I stand on the pedal at 130 miles an hour or so. What that means to me is that the tires at that point are the limiting factor in stopping distance and time, and not the brake pads. I've also never managed to glaze, melt, or otherwise destroy a set. Balancing their usefulness on track, they also don't suck on the street. If lubed properly, they don't squeal under casual braking, and they work even when dead cold, which isn't something that can be said of all race compound pads, which sometimes require significant heat before they'll have any bite at all. If they have a downside, it's that they dust like crazy. So my wheels are pretty much constantly filthy at this point. Now, what about the rotors, you ask? Well, my rotors are absolutely nothing special. In fact, they're quite the opposite of that. I found them on clearance for $20 a pop several years ago, and I bought a stack of them. I expect to get 4 to 5 events out of them before something like this happens. You can't see that too well in this view. I'll put a thumbnail up here. And you might say, well, 4 to 5 events, that's not a very long life. No, and they would probably last much longer if not for the abusive heat cycling of track use. I like to look at it economically in that I could drive for years replacing cheap brake rotors for the cost of a single rotor for most big brake kits. You just have to remember that unless you're running carbon ceramics, your iron rotors are wear items no matter how expensive. This section is a short one. I really haven't done anything to the motor specifically for the track aside from adding an oil pan baffle and recycling a drink bottle for use as a coolant overflow. I covered the oil pan baffle in a previous video, and as I mentioned there, it's probably not necessary if you're driving on street tires and have no wings or splitters. But it's cheap peace of mind and a relatively easy install. Beyond that, a C30A doesn't really need much to handle a little bit of track use at stock power levels. It's worth noting at this point that I've listed tires before any suspension components with respect to importance, and that's because they just flat out matter more. If I had to set a fast lap with $1 million on the line and you gave me a choice of 2 identical cars, one of them with $10,000 Penske shocks expertly adjusted but running on all-season tires, and the other one running on blown stock dampers but with heat-cycled track tires, I'll take the tires every time, and I'll be right every time. Now, having said that, you can do a track day on all seasons, or on those summer tires you found on sale on eBay. However, don't expect to get more than a day out of them, and don't expect them to have much grip left after a few hot laps. Personally, I found something of a sweet spot in my tire preference with tires like these Falcon Azenas RT615K+. They're generally regarded as street tires, but they offer grip approaching that of a true track tire. Previously, I've also run Dunlop Z1 Star Specs as well as Nitto NT05s with similar results. Tires of this category do generally pretty well at providing a comfortable ride on the road, an ability to handle at least a little bit of rain, while at the same time providing excellent grip on the track and not degrading unreasonably when put through that kind of abuse. If they have a downside, it's extreme cold weather performance. In fact, they actually have a warning on most of them that they probably shouldn't be used in temperatures significantly below freezing. But then again, that kind of cold temperature doesn't normally coincide with most people's track seasons. Now, just to cover the base on the wheels, I've opted for a 17-inch wheel all the way around versus the 15 and 16-inch staggered setup that came with the car originally. This was partially for aesthetic preference and partially for tire selection. Plenty of people still track their NSXs on the original Fat 5s, which is why I'm not really including wheels officially in this list. Stock NSX suspension is pretty good, so you should probably consider this section some of my personal preference versus outright necessity. But I did make the changes specifically for track use, so I'm including them in the video. One of the first things I did when I brought my car home, as you might imagine, was take it to an autocross. And there I found that the NSX felt very softly sprung. It had a lot of body roll and a lot of lean, and that didn't sit well with me. So one of the first modifications I made suspension-wise were adjustable sway bars. These helped with the body roll without sacrificing too much ride quality. In addition to keeping the car flatter in the corners, they also helped then to later dial in the handling with respect to understeer and oversteer as I continued to make tire, spring, and damper changes. I'll give the coilovers an honorable mention here, as they allow for the car to be corner balanced, rake adjusted, and have interchangeable spring rates. Yes, contrary to what the internet would have you believe, coilover's primary function is not just lowering the car. In my case, I opted for KW's Variant 3 coilovers. They're relatively simple to adjust, and they're widely understood to have more of a compliant ride on the road while still being composed on the track. And I can confirm that on all but the worst roads, they still ride pretty well, and I have yet to have any complaints about them on the track. I've had them on the car for 7 years now and have no regrets. Again, it's worth mentioning KW is not paying me to say this. I'm actually able to illustrate a little bit what the suspension changes have done for me. I have here 2 sets of photos. The first set of photos was taken at one of the first autocrosses I ever did with the car. This is bone stock suspension, so original springs, dampers, and original wheel and tire sizes. You can see how much the car leans under this cornering load. The second set of photos were taken several years later. This was on the same parking lot, on the same surface, with nearly the same course layout. Only this time the car has updated tires, dampers, and sway bars. You can see, even with much more grip from better tires in the second set of photos, the car has rolled notably less than in the earlier photos. I think, aside from those items I've already mentioned, the only track-specific modification I've made to the car is adding the tow hook on the front. Now that's one I occasionally catch some flack over because I guess it's kind of a fad in the import tuner scene to add an anodized tow hook here and there on your car. However, I will defend mine in that it has gotten me pulled out of a gravel trap at Road Atlanta, and I therefore consider it legitimized. So thanks for watching. I should be back on a more regular weekly schedule going forward. I am working on our next big track feature, and of course I'm always working on improving the content that you see on the channel in general. And with that in mind, if you have anything that you'd like to see or have questions you'd like answered on the channel, please drop a comment below. It's fair to say at this point that I definitely read them all. Don't forget to click like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Until next time, I'm Richard, this is Laugh of the World, and I'll see you in the next video, if not at the track.